What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another book review. Today we're going to be talking about Permanent Record by Edward Snowden. Just going to jump right into it. This is very atypical book review for me for a number of reasons. One, I don't usually write reviews or do reviews about biographies. It's kind of difficult to say a whole bunch about someone's biography. And number two, it's just an unusual video for me because I never had any expectation of picking up this book. I'll kind of tell you guys a story about how it happened. I don't remember if it was on Facebook or if it was Twitter or whatever it was, but I stumbled across Snowden's book. Someone posted like a link talking about how there were certain, I guess, maybe distribution avenues that wanted to ban Snowden's book. And I went into the bookstore the other day, Half Price Books, shouts out, Oklahoma City, what's up, Southside. I walked into the bookstore yesterday and the other day, and on like the new releases, I saw his book, and really it was the cover. Like, shouts out to Rodrigo Corral, because the cover design I thought just was very slick and very much made me want to read it after flipping through. And I realized like a couple of things that have like in the recent years attracted me to Snowden. He's done a lot of appearances at like Bitcoin conferences where he like virtually Skypes in and talking about different issues, particularly around privacy, right? Because that's kind of like the crux of his entire whistleblowing was issues surrounding privacy. And just a short story about my own relation to Mr. Snowden. Whenever he first blew the whistle back in 2009, 10, or 12 or 13, whenever it was, I remember the media portraying him as being basically a spy, a traitor, and someone. And I remember he got locked. He talks about this in the book, the time period where he was like trapped in a Russian airport for a number of weeks, and so it made it seem like he was like trying to evade capture, which I mean he essentially was. But the way that he was portrayed was being that of someone who's very anti-American, right? And you, in reading the book, realize that this is definitely not the case. Like, Snowden came from a family of civil servants, military and the State Department go back in his line for a couple of different generations. And you also learn that he's someone who's extremely principled. Like, he talks about his high school days, where you learn that he was definitely a rebel rouser, someone who liked touting the rules, like trying to, hack the rules and hack high school and such. He never finished. Well, no, he eventually did get his GED, but he dropped out of high school. He was a computer guy his entire life, right? And so he goes on eventually to become what's known as a special technical officer or something like that for the CIA. And he ends up working for a bunch of different contractors, and he explains like the perverse relationship between contract work and government work. And I'm not going to get too much into the details of the book, but because well, for a number of reasons, but there were a couple of things I wanted to talk about. The first, one thing that Snowden talks about that really stuck out to me was the relationship between big tech and the government, right? And I'm just going to read a quote. This is on page 122. He says, "This, to my thinking, actually represented the great nexus of the intelligence community and the tech industry. Both are entrenched, unelected powers that pride themselves on maintaining absolute secrecy about their developments. Both believe that they have the solutions for everything, which they never hesitate to unilaterally impose. Above all, they both believe that these solutions are inherently apolitical because they're based on data whose prerogatives are regarded as preferable to the chaotic whims of the common citizen." So, in the book, Snowden talks about like how he came to learn about the mass surveillance of the government. Through his role as a system administrator, it wasn't like someone just like came up and told him like, "Hey, we're spying on everyone, like we have everyone's data and we've been recording it," right? He talks about metadata, and he talks about the importance of metadata, and he talks about how there became this perverted relationship between the courts who give permission to these intelligence agencies to search through conversations and such, and the relationship between this metadata and these companies and how it's used, right? At one point, he discusses how 90% of the internet infrastructure is owned by the United States. So it's essentially like impossible for you to communicate without it going through American businesses or American infrastructure. And privacy is really like the central tenet of this book. And one thing that I really liked about Edward's writing is that he's actually a really great prose writer. For a computer geek, you wouldn't expect him to be such a good writer. And this is probably my favorite quote on page 208. I'm just going to read. "There is simply no way to ignore privacy. Because the citizenry freedoms are interdependent, to surrender your own privacy is really to surrender everyone's. You might choose to give it up out of convenience or under the popular pretext that privacy is only required by those who have something to hide. But saying that you don't need or want privacy because you have nothing to hide is to assume that no one should have or could have to hide anything, including their immigration status, employment history, financial history, and health records. You're assuming that no one, including yourself, might object to revealing to anyone information about their religious beliefs, political affiliations, and sexual activities, as casually as some choose to reveal their movie, music taste, and reading preferences. Ultimately, saying you don't care about privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different from saying you don't care about freedom of speech because you have nothing to say." This quote really hit home for me because, sorry, got an alert. I'm going to try to wrap this up quickly because I only got 20% on my phone battery. But I remember whenever, I can't remember what the law that was passed after 2001 9/11 attack, but essentially it gave very broad scope powers to the executive branch and to these intelligence agencies. I can't remember the name of it, but it allowed them to start surveilling us and using our data and our communications that are digital. And Edward does a really good job of contrasting the Constitution and the principles of privacy and freedom from unwarranted search and seizure in this principle in the analog world, and how it's just been perverted and how it's been abused in the digital world. And at one point he says, laws often take 10 years to catch up to technology. As someone who's planning to apply to law school this year, the intersection of law, technology, constitutional rights, digital privacy, digital property, right? These are things that really interest me. So it really spoke to me. And I remember whenever the Snowden revelations first came out, I was talking with my dad, and my dad's an ex-military guy, Air Force for 21 years. And he took the same kind of belief and approach that Snowden talks about in that last paragraph, which was that I have nothing to hide and I'm okay with the government, observing our communications, surveilling our communications because it's going to protect us, right? But I think Snowden, he does a good job of making you realize that the principles that America were founded on, they existed for a reason, right? And they have helped to not only grow this democracy into what I believe is sort of not only the best country, but the best experiment of multiculturalism and, the best exemplary of liberal ideas, classical liberal ideas, what some may call libertarian ideas, right, to this day. And it's important that we defend these. And largely technology has taken away many of our rights, whether that be search and seizure, whether that be privacy, whether that be First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights through First Amendment rights through censorship on some of these big media platforms, right? And so what I'm really getting at is technology not only has the power to take away rights, but it's also the only avenue for protecting our rights as we move forward. And Snowden talks about how encryption and the use of encryption is the only way to secure privacy. And so I think about technical developments such as Urbit, which is Urbit. I'm kind of going to butcher what this is, but essentially it's a decentralized cloud computing, privacy, peer-to-peer encrypted network communications So like you could think about your Urbit is your own personal computer, right? And so it uses encryption to protect your data. I think about the use of the Tor browser and the dissemination, dudes like, what's his name? That Texas dude, Cody something, from Ghost Gunner, who published, the blueprints of how to 3D print guns. Cody Wilson, there's his name. I think about Bitcoin. I think about the Lightning Network. I think about technology such as Monero. Edward Snowden's a big fan of Zcash. I'm not, but Edward Snowden is. The point is that we have to make sure that we don't allow fear to drive us into a dystopian reality. And it's important that we hold true to our principles that the founding fathers outlined for us as we move into the digital age. And I think it's very important that we have lawyers who are not only technically competent, but also who very much hold those principles and hold those values in high esteem, which is kind of what I hope to do in my own life. And so biographies are not something I read often, but I found this one very, very helpful. I think that you can always learn something from everyone, but someone like Edward Snowden, who I think will go down in history as playing a very critical role in the 21st century, and it's undeniable that he's already had a massive impact in the discussion and in the general discourse and in securing privacy for all of humanity as we move into the future. So I encourage you guys to pick up this book. It's a very interesting read. If you're interested in like a spy autobiography novel type of thing, I think it's also pretty telling of how some of these intelligence agencies operate today and what spy work and what also just like digital warfare looks like in today's age. So thank you guys for watching. See you in the next video. Peace.
Law.